I stared at the bank statement on my laptop screen, my hands trembling so badly I could barely keep the mouse steady. $2.4 million. Gone. Not invested. Not transferred to a business account. Simply gone. Vanished into thin air like it had never existed at all. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. How was I supposed to walk into that meeting in 45 minutes and pretend everything was fine? How was I supposed to look my business partners in the eye and act lively, enthusiastic, ready to close the biggest deal of my career when my entire world was collapsing around me? I was Michael Harrison, 52 years old, and I'd built everything from nothing. The corner office on the 43rd floor, the view of the Chicago skyline, the reputation as one of the sharpest merger and acquisition specialists in the Midwest, all of it was real. All of it was earned through decades of 16-hour days and calculated risks. But sitting in my study at 5:30 in the morning, with the city still dark outside my windows, I realized that none of it mattered if I couldn't figure out what had happened to that money. 3 weeks ago, I'd liquidated a significant portion of my portfolio, $2.4 million, earmarked for the Prescott-Hartley acquisition. It was supposed to be held in our firm's escrow account, ready to be deployed the moment the contracts were signed. Except when I checked the account balance last night, unable to sleep because of pre-meeting jitters, it wasn't there. Let me back up. Let me tell you about the life I had before everything fell apart. I lived in Winnetka, in a 5-bedroom Tudor-style home that my wife Jennifer and I had restored over the past 8 years. The kind of house that appeared in architectural magazines. Original hardwood floors, a chef's kitchen with marble countertops, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that I'd filled with first editions and leather-bound classics I actually read. The property backed onto the country club golf course, and from our master bedroom, you could see the 13th hole, perfectly manicured and impossibly green. Jennifer was a former art history professor, now a museum consultant. She was beautiful in that understated way that comes from confidence and good breeding. Blonde hair usually swept into a neat ponytail, blue eyes that could freeze you with a glance if she was unhappy. We'd been married for 26 years. We had 2 kids, both in college now. Our life was exactly what a successful man in his 50s was supposed to have. Stability, respect, the kind of marriage that lasted because both people understood the arrangement. We were partners in building something substantial. I'd never been the kind of guy who came home talking about feelings. I wasn't absent, exactly, but I was focused. Jennifer understood that. She had her own life, her own circles. Every Saturday morning, she had brunch with the same 4 women at Café Central in Evanston. Every Thursday evening, she volunteered at the Art Institute. We had dinner together most nights, usually at 7 o'clock, usually discussing logistics, whose parent was visiting, which charity gala was coming up, whether we needed to have the landscapers come early this season. It wasn't romantic, maybe, but it was real. It was built on the understanding that we were both grown-ups with serious commitments outside our marriage, and that was fine. That was more than fine. That was maturity. My assistant, Karen, had been with me for 19 years. She was 61, divorced twice, sharp as a tack, and the only person in the office who dared to tell me when I was being unreasonable. She handled my calendar, my finances, my correspondence. I trusted her completely. That's what made what happened next even more incomprehensible. "Michael, you need to look at something," she'd said yesterday afternoon, standing in my office doorway with her arms crossed. Karen never stood in doorways. She entered rooms with purpose. That should have been my first warning. I'd been on the phone with a client, but I waved her in and gestured for her to sit. She closed the door behind her, which was the second warning sign. "I was reconciling the escrow account statements," she said carefully, "because I noticed the bank sent over a discrepancy report yesterday. I wanted to get ahead of it before the Prescott-Hartley people started asking questions." And I'd felt my stomach drop even then, though I had no idea why. "The $2.4 million you transferred 3 weeks ago? It's not in the escrow account, Michael. It was redirected. 3 days after it was deposited, someone initiated a wire transfer to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands." I remember standing up. I remember my chair rolling backward and hitting the window. I remember my voice sounding strange when I asked, "What do you mean, someone? Who authorized that?" Karen slid a printed email across my desk. It was from the bank, addressed to both of us, confirming a wire transfer request signed with my digital signature. My signature. The one that only I had access to. The one I used for the largest transactions. The one that required a specific password only I knew. "I didn't do this," I'd said flatly. "I know," Karen had replied, and there was something in her voice, pity maybe, or fear, that told me this was about to get much, much worse. That's when I'd gone home, poured myself a scotch that I barely touched, and spent the night staring at statements and bank records, trying to understand how $2.4 million could vanish in the time it took for most people to plan a vacation. Now it was 6 in the morning, and I had a meeting with the Prescott-Hartley principals in less than an hour. They were flying in from New York. They expected to sign papers. They expected to receive funding confirmation. They expected the deal to close by the end of business today. I looked at my reflection in the dark window of my study. I looked tired. I looked old. I looked like a man whose entire life was about to implode. The thing about acting lively when you're in crisis is that you have to believe, even for a moment, that everything can still be saved. You have to walk into that room and convince yourself that this is solvable, that there's an explanation, that by the end of the day, you'll have figured it out and everything will return to normal. I was about to discover that normal had already ended. I walked into the office tower at 7:45 in the morning. The lobby was empty except for the security guard, who nodded at me without looking up from his phone. My shoes echoed on the marble floor, a sound I'd never noticed before, though I'd walked across this same floor 1,000 times. Everything felt different now. Everything felt like a crime scene. Karen was already at her desk when I got to the 43rd floor. She had 2 cups of coffee waiting, and her face was pale, drawn. She'd been crying. "I called the bank," she said, before I could even set my briefcase down. "I spoke to a manager in the fraud division. Michael, they're looking at this as an internal job. Someone with access to the escrow account and knowledge of your signature protocol." I sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs across from her desk. "That narrows it down to maybe 3 people in the entire firm." 4, Karen said quietly. "I pulled the access logs this morning. From the last 6 months, only 4 people have opened that account file. You, me, Richard, and Jennifer." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the armrests of the chair. "Jennifer doesn't have access to—" "She does," Karen interrupted, and I could hear the apology in her voice. "Your wife has had the access code since 2019. You added her when you were reorganizing your portfolio after that cancer scare, remember? You wanted her to be able to manage things if something happened to you." I did remember. Jennifer had been terrified that year. We'd gotten the biopsy results, benign, thank God. But for 2 weeks, we both lived in that suspended moment of not knowing. I'd updated my will, my insurance, everything. I'd given Jennifer access to the accounts because love meant trust, and I trusted my wife. "It wasn't Jennifer," I said flatly. "I'm not saying it was," Karen replied, "but the bank's investigation is going to look at everyone. And Michael, there's something else. I checked the account activity more carefully. Whoever did this knew your PIN, the one you never wrote down, the one you said you'd never told anyone." I felt my heart rate accelerate. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone very close to you knows things about your finances that they shouldn't." My phone buzzed. A text from our firm's managing partner, David Prescott. "Where are you? The Hartley people are already here." I stood up. "I need to talk to the bank before I go into that meeting. Get me the fraud investigator on the phone. Now." But as I turned to leave, my office door opened, and Richard Hartley walked in. Not David, not one of the clients. Richard, who'd been my business partner for 12 years. Richard, whose family name was literally on the acquisition deal we were about to close. "We need to talk," Richard said, closing the door behind him, "before you go into that conference room and make a catastrophic mistake." I stared at him. Richard was 55, silver-haired, with the kind of face that belonged in a luxury car commercial. He'd always been the charming one, the one who took clients to dinner, who made the big presentations, who closed the deals with handshakes and smiles. I handled the numbers. Richard handled the people. If this is about the escrow account, I started. It's not, Richard said. Or rather, it is, but not the way you think. Michael, sit down. I'm done sitting down, I said. I'm done having people stand in my office and tell me cryptic things. Someone stole $2.4 million from an account that only a handful of people can access. That money was supposed to close a deal that would generate $20 million in revenue for this firm. So whatever you're about to tell me, just tell me straight. Richard pulled out his phone. He scrolled through something, then turned the screen toward me. It was a photograph of Jennifer, my wife. But she wasn't alone. She was sitting across a table from a man I didn't recognize, and they were holding hands. That was taken 3 days before your money disappeared, Richard said quietly. At a restaurant in Evanston. The man's name is David Crane. He's a financial advisor. Specifically, he's a financial advisor who specializes in helping people move assets offshore for tax purposes, or sometimes for other reasons. I felt the room spin. I reached out and grabbed the edge of my desk to steady myself. Jennifer hired him 6 months ago, Richard continued. She came to me because she wanted advice about divorce attorneys. She wanted to know how to protect assets before filing. She was afraid, and I quote, that if she just left, you'd tie up her finances in litigation for years. That's insane, I said, but my voice sounded hollow. Jennifer and I are fine. We're not getting divorced. Are you? Richard asked, and his tone was almost gentle, which made it so much worse. Michael, I've known you for 12 years. I've seen you work 80-hour weeks while your wife spent weekends with her museum friends. I've watched you come home at midnight and eat cold dinner alone because she was already asleep. I've never once heard you talk about your marriage like it was something you wanted to protect. You don't know anything about my marriage. I know Jennifer hired a divorce attorney in November. I know she spent 6 months moving money around. And I know she asked me point blank how much of your assets would be considered marital property in an Illinois divorce. I sank into my chair. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wasn't sure it was my place. Because you're my partner, and I didn't want to get involved in something that personal. And honestly, Richard sighed, because I was hoping it would resolve itself without destroying the firm. But then this happened, and I realized I had to tell you the truth. My phone buzzed again. David Prescott. Michael, we're walking. This is unprofessional. You have 10 minutes. There's more, Richard said. Jennifer didn't act alone. The financial advisor, David Crane, he's her lover. They've been together for about 8 months. He's the one who actually orchestrated the transfer. He has connections to people who specialize in moving money through shell accounts in the Caymans. He was going to help her hide the funds until the divorce was finalized. And then she'd claim she didn't know where the money went. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't do anything but sit in my leather chair and watch the 43-story view of Chicago blur in front of me. The good news, Richard said, is that I've already been in contact with your bank's fraud department. I've given them everything I have, the photos, the timeline, the documentation of Jennifer's conversations with the attorney. The money hasn't cleared the shell accounts yet. With federal intervention, there's a good chance they can recover it. And the bad news? I asked quietly. The bad news is that Jennifer's about to find out that her plan didn't work, and she's going to know that you know. And the bad news is that you still have a meeting with the Hartley people in 8 minutes, and you have to decide whether you're going to tell them the truth about what happened to their funding, or whether you're going to lie. I looked at Richard, really looked at him. He was my partner. He was the man I'd built this firm with from nothing, and he'd been protecting me without me even knowing it. I'm going to tell them the truth, I said. The conference room fell silent when I walked in. The Hartley people, 3 executives in expensive suits, were sitting at the far end of the table with David Prescott. Their expressions were already annoyed, already skeptical. David looked furious. Michael, David said, you're late. I am, I replied. I sat down at the head of the table. And I need to tell you something before we proceed with anything. I laid out the entire story, the missing $2.4 million, the investigation, Jennifer's affair with a financial advisor, the attempted asset concealment, the offshore accounts, all of it. I didn't try to spin it or minimize it. I just told them what happened. The Hartley people exchanged glances. The oldest one, a man named Theodore Hartley, leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Harrison," he said slowly, "are you telling us that you came into this meeting knowing that you couldn't fund the acquisition?" "Yes," I said. "I am. And you're telling us this now instead of trying to cover it up?" "Yes." Theodore was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something I didn't expect. He smiled. Not a kind smile exactly, but something like respect. "That takes guts," he said. "Most men in your position would have lied, would have told us the money was in transit, would have asked for a delay, would have hoped the problem resolved itself before we found out." "I'm not most men," I said. "I'm a man whose wife is stealing from him, and I'm tired of pretending everything is fine." "Here's what we're going to do," Theodore continued. "We're going to delay closing for 48 hours. In that time, you're going to work with your bank to recover those funds. If you can recover them, we proceed as planned. If you can't, we'll restructure the deal so that we front the capital for the acquisition, and you'll take a reduced percentage of the profits until you've repaid us." David Prescott looked like he might have a stroke. "Theodore, you can't be serious." "I'm very serious," Hartley said. "Integrity is the rarest commodity in business, Mr. Prescott. This man just proved he has it. That's worth taking a risk on." The meeting ended 15 minutes later. David pulled me aside as I was leaving. "What the hell were you thinking?" he hissed. "You just admitted to a massive security breach in front of our clients." "I admitted to the truth," I said, "and unlike you, I'm not going to spend the next 6 months lying to cover it up. The firm's reputation depends on honesty, David, not on pretending we have control over situations we don't." I went home at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Jennifer's car was in the driveway. She was in the sitting room off the kitchen on her laptop when I found her. She looked up at me with that careful, composed expression she always wore. "Michael," she said, "you're home early." I didn't sit down. I stood in the doorway and looked at my wife of 26 years, this woman I'd built a life with, this woman I'd trusted completely, and I realized that I'd never really known her at all. "The bank called me," I said. "They recovered the money, all of it. The federal investigators traced the transfers through the shell accounts in the Caymans. They know about David Crane. They know about your attorney. They know about everything." Jennifer's face went very still. "I'm filing for divorce," I continued. "Tomorrow morning. My attorney will be contacting you by noon, and I'm pressing charges for theft. The money was in a business account. That makes it fraud." "Michael," Jennifer started. "Don't," I said. "Don't explain, don't apologize. Don't tell me you were unhappy, or that you felt trapped, or that you deserved better. I don't want to hear it. I want you out of this house by Friday. If you're not gone, I'll have you removed." I left her there and went up to my study. I poured a glass of scotch, the same one I'd poured the night before, and I drank it slowly, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as the afternoon turned to evening. 48 hours later, the Prescott-Hartley deal closed. The federal investigators arrested David Crane and 3 other people who were part of the money laundering operation. Jennifer's attorney called my attorney and tried to negotiate a settlement. I refused. I was going to court. I was going to prove exactly what she'd done, and I was going to make sure she faced consequences. The divorce was finalized 9 months later. Jennifer got 30% of the marital assets, far less than she would have gotten if she'd simply asked for it. David Crane pleaded guilty to wire fraud and is currently serving a 4-year sentence in a federal prison in Illinois. The money was recovered in full. I kept my office on the 43rd floor. I kept my partnership with Richard, who turned out to be a better friend than I'd ever realized. I kept the house in Winnetka, though it felt different now, less like a trophy and more like a place where I lived alone. And I learned something that year that I wish I'd learned much earlier. The life you think you have is never the one you're actually living. The woman I was married to wasn't the woman I thought she was. The marriage I thought was stable was already over. And the only thing that saved me wasn't my money or my reputation or my business acumen. It was the decision to tell the truth, even when it cost me everything. The real twist, the one nobody sees coming, is that honesty is the only currency that actually holds value when everything else burns away.